Hello, everyone. I don't actually expect that many people to be here because it's Super Bowl Sunday, which I totally missed. So I was too busy battling my internet with Spectrum. So if you guys notice it looking any better, that's probably why, because I upgraded the internet. So hopefully people come and I'll just wait here and chill. But still, I have that. I also changed the delay. Let's see. No Super Bowl for you. Here's the thing. I played football growing up. Well, I was forced to play football by my mom, but I was really good at it. But I never like loved football. And I basically, after I was done with it, because I broke my arm, I gravelized my wrist. I had a distal radius fracture, and then I continued playing on it. And after that, that was, gosh, my junior year of high school. I never played football again. And I was never like really into it. It was just something that I kind of like do for fun. But my true love was basketball. So like this year, well, and pretty much every year before it, I only really cared about the Super Bowl insofar as my family cared about it. I'm literally wearing like a Michigan jersey, or a shirt, but I could not care less about the NFL at all. Don't know anything about it. Now the NBA, I'm thinking, so CJ Candlelight, I am Calendek. I'm thinking about moving the streams, but the thing is, like, there are days where I still work. Like today, I did a lot of work, and sometimes I have clients, where, you know, I have to work with them like up until like 7 p.m. sometimes on Sundays. And so like I have my streams at this time because like generally it's when people can come on. But even if you miss the streams, because like, and that's the thing I had to think about, like between, I have them late at night because I know people are usually winding down with their day and, you know, that kind of stuff. But if you do miss the streams, I'm pretty sure I always have them like up on like the videos and stuff, on like my channel if you go on like live content. I don't know when's like the best time, because like everybody has like different times. Some people have asked me to not do it during early parts of the day because then, you know, they're working. Some people don't want me to do it in the morning because then they haven't gotten up yet. So everybody has like different times they want the stream at. So I can't, no one's, or not, I should say no one, not everybody's going to be happy, but you know, I have to try to get that happy middle ground, and 7:30 is like good enough for me and seems to be good for other people. But if it becomes like a huge issue, then of course, you know, try to change it. Born to Play NFL commercial is worth a breakdown. Okay. I will have to check it out. That's like the best part about, I think, like the NFL, or I should say the Super Bowl just in general, is the freaking commercials. And I know obviously that everybody thinks that's why like people tune in. But like, yeah, there's some commercials that are just like really good. Man, oh man, please, LeBron or MJ, you're gonna start me on like a huge rant. Here, let me go. I'm gonna turn on the air because it's again, I don't know why it gets so hot at night. And then I'm going to discuss that because, okay, that's a good one. All right, hold on. Okay. I'm doing good, man. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to, this is a conversation that I've had with a lot of people. Never on my channel though, but I've had with a lot of people. And over my long life, and this is gonna be a rant. I hope you're ready to trigger me having a rant. But I was literally thinking about this yesterday because I was watching Shannon Sharp's interview with Stephen A. Smith, and I've been following Undisputed, Shannon Sharp, Stephen A., Skip Bayless, First Things First, with Nick and you know, everybody for years now. My GOAT is MJ. LeBron is the second greatest player of all time. Now, again, I'm going to try to limit myself to not being super ranty, but I break it down in between terms of skill on the court. So like ability to be able to play the game. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Derek. Exactly, correct. Skill on the court and the ability to play the game versus your resume, right? So like your basketball achievements. Now, unfortunately, I think MJ has LeBron beat basically on like both fronts, right? And this is why LeBron is in front of everybody else too, because LeBron, from a basketball perspective, I think is better than everybody not named MJ, right? From like a basketball playing perspective, because he can do everything on, or at the height of his career, could do everything on both ends of the floor, right? And he's the greatest scorer of all time. Gosh, I have so many thoughts on this. And what he can accomplish, I think, from one end of the court to the other is better than anybody else not named Jordan. And then as far as his career, again, I think LeBron is like, he came back from the moment I thought he was the second best player of all time was when he came back against the Golden State Warriors from being 3-1 down. I said, you know what, screw it, he's the second best. Ooh, that spicy. I've always thought of Jordan. Jordan isn't the GOAT of scoring. I think even in the most generous metrics that you want to say, Jordan isn't the GOAT of scoring, because there are other players who scored more than him, and then other players who scored more like efficiently than him, right? So there's like a ton of different examples that I can give. For one, obviously, like, so Wilt Chamberlain is like an elder god of basketball. I've talked about this a little bit, but you know, he'd scored like what, 40 points a game in a season or 50 points a game in a season. He has the 100-point game, right? So if you want to talk about just like pure scoring, then there is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who I think had the longest stretch of 20 points per game. I think he scored like 20 points per game for 20 years or something like that, or like 18 years. And then of course LeBron has the most points scored like ever. And even though, yeah, sure, MJ played for 13 years and he still got to like number 3, maybe number 4 now on the all-time scoring list, I would still say he's not like definitively the greatest at scoring. But I will say MJ was simultaneously one of the greatest at scoring, like the basketball ever, and then also one of the greatest defenders ever, and also one of the greatest just offensive players ever. One of the greatest quotes I think I've ever heard about MJ. And I take this actually into things I just do in my regular life, is MJ stopped becoming better at basketball and started becoming better at winning. And of course it was the Last Dance documentary, I think that came out, which a ton of people watched, rightfully so. But that like sticks in my mind. Even like, so I'll be like writing a book or like writing a chapter or even like editing, right? And I will be thinking like, oh, I need to get better at this thing, or I need to focus more on this thing, or like if I want to do editing this way or get this story written that way, I'll think about like how to specifically hone my craft in that one skill. But then I literally think about that quote in my mind and I say, I need to stop trying to get better at like, and this sounds so stupid, but like at that one thing and get better at storytelling. Right? Because like if I get better just at crafting a story in general, right, it will uplift basically like everything else that I do. And again, not to rant on this, but I think that is a fundamental difference between how I see like LeBron and MJ, because I think MJ, for the limited time that we have, just became super good at just winning basketball games. LeBron was there for a little bit, for like, gosh, a good like 5-6 years. He stopped becoming better at basketball and started becoming better at winning. And I think MJ simply was able to do that more consistently, right, across like 6 championships and multiple runs to the playoffs and all that kind of stuff. So yes, without this becoming like an hour-long thing, I think Michael Jordan is the best. I think LeBron is the second best. I think LeBron's resume and skill set both are second to Michael's, simply because Michael was the defensive player of the year. He averaged 10 assists one year. He scored, the 3rd most points ever. He was just like if God made a basketball player, or like if you just made one up in a lab, that would be Michael Jordan. And then literally next would be LeBron James. But LeBron's almost like a superhuman, so it's like it's different. But there you go. You got me to rant for 15 minutes, which could be much longer. I just hope you know. About Michael Jordan versus MJ or LeBron. Ooh-wee. Max, you have thoughts on Planet of the Apes movies, old or reboots? I just caught the new trailer and I adore the film series. So that's funny that you mentioned that. Planet of the Apes is one of my closest friends' favorite movie series. Well, aside from like Godzilla. I believe it's Rise of the Planet of the Apes is his favorite movie, maybe ever. And generally, I think the reboots of the Planet of the Apes are pretty good, because it's absolutely amazing. I think my interaction with them. Okay, so she's gonna kill me. And I've told this to people before. The main thing that I remember about Planet of the Apes was that I saw the reboot with I forget the man's name. He in the very first one, he was trapped in in another movie, he was trapped in the ground with the rock over him. I forget the actor's name. But he was in the first one. And that was a good movie. But funny enough, I went to see it with my brother and my sister. James Franco, there you go. Thank you. I went to see it with my brother and my sister, and I remember being like, oh, this is actually a pretty cool reinterpretation of the originals, because I remember on the originals it was much more of like the astronaut went into what ended up being, spoilers, parallel universe, and it lands on Earth and then gets taken over by an ape society. But in this one it was more of like an origin story, which I thought was cool. But I remember specifically at the very end of the movie, because it was a virus, the simian flu, I'm pretty sure. It ended with the people who were infected, and I don't think knowing that they were infected, getting on a plane. And that plane, there was a shot from the airport, and on the signs, like the tickers for the airport, you could see the destinations for the planes. And the plane that the people who were infected unknowingly got on was to New York. And I will never forget that my sister and then my brother and I were coming back from that movie. And she was like, oh, wow. I can't believe the movie made that, like, ended like that with 9/11. And me and my brother look at each other and we're like, what? And she's like, yeah, the movie ended basically like saying that the Planet of the Apes, like the flu, caused 9/11. And my brother and I were, again, just dumbfounded. And we're like, no, it ended with the plane going to New York and spreading the flu. And my sister was like, no, they were on a plane and the plane was going to crash into the Twin Towers because the pilot got infected with the simian flu, and that's what caused 9/11. And I'm not laughing at 9/11. I'm laughing at the fact that again, I look at this from like a writing perspective. I am sure that none of the people who wrote that script ever thought that someone who's gonna look at people getting on a plane at the end of Planet of the Apes and be like, oh, this is going, I'm gonna have to put something in here so people don't think that I'm writing the story of how the Twin Towers got hit by a plane. And me and my brother, we could not convince my sister to save our lives that it was about like, oh, it's a highly populated, dense like area of people, and the flu is just going to spread between them, right? You know, and that's really, really bad. She was convinced it was supposed to be a 9/11 story. So that is my whole memory and interaction with Planet of the Apes. So I've seen the second one, I think, and the third one, maybe. But I can't remember hardly anything about them. Some people just come up with a really asinine logic and convince them. You know what? Again, as a writer, I've heard a lot of crap from a lot of people about a lot of different stories. And you just have to say, you know what? That's your truth for your story. That's how you interpret it. And you don't challenge it insofar as, you know, you can. I mean, some stuff is just, you know, like objectively wrong. I'm not the authority on Planet of the Apes, so I couldn't tell my sister she was like objectively wrong. Yeah, I didn't write the story. But you know, I just don't put energy into, if that's the person's interpretation, that's their interpretation. But to get back on the track that I veered way off of, yeah, that's what I think about Planet of the Apes. I think they're cool. I think they're good. I don't think they're like fantastic, you know, like personally, but you know, they're good movies. Happy new Beyonce Day to all who celebrate. Yeah, except me. No, please, no offense to the bees. I don't kill me. Don't find me. These people who are like fans of celebrities, you know, like the Beehive and then the Swifties and then the Barbs and then I don't even know what all the other ones are called, are some terrifying people. I remember like, you know, fandoms back in the day being like the Potterheads and all that kind of stuff, and it was just kind of like nerds who were very like innocuous. And they'd, you know, huddle in the corner reading their books and fangirling over, you know, people getting together in ships and whatnot. And I'm talking about like dudes and girls. But now it's just like, oh yeah, if you insult a celebrity online, they'll come burn your house down. They'll like send you a pipe bomb in the mail if you say like word one about like a celebrity. So gotta be careful about that. I keep forgetting that like people watch me for some reason, and I don't want to make any enemies. So Golden Age, thoughts on Avatar: The Last Airbender is an anime debate. How does Avatar: The Last Airbender fit into the Western and Eastern storytelling distinction? Lord, I'm going to have to like make these streams longer to to be able to like, because I want to talk about so much of these, but I want to be able to like not spend an hour at a time on these subjects. But I will try to answer this as best I can. Avatar: The Last Airbender, I think by definition is not anime. And I think people who argue against that have a point. I think that, again, so names and I love language. I call myself like a little hobbyist linguist because I really like how language works. And naming things is just kind of like, you know, we come up with names and they don't mean anything. Nothing is given like an intrinsic natural name. So like anime is by definition, I'm pretty sure, just like animation made from Japan. It's not even like Eastern, it's like specifically Japan. And because of that, Avatar: The Last Airbender can't be anime, I'm pretty sure, because it's just like not made from Japan. If we want to talk about like specifics. Now, if we just want to like be real, of course, like anime inspired Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it like takes huge swaths of its creative influence from anime. Now, I don't think there's really even much like deeper to go into it from that perspective, because it's doesn't make a huge difference, I think, holistically from like a narrative perspective, if it's anime or not. Like, who cares if it's like, it doesn't change the story at all. I just think that people were invested in that because anime for a very long time was considered this thing that was like niche and weird. I remember being like made fun of in school for liking anime, and a lot of people who liked Avatar didn't want to like feel like they liked anime. So they like fought against it, and the people who really liked anime wanted to claim Avatar because again, it's one of the best shows ever. But I think ultimately, again, it doesn't really matter. Now, how it fits into like the Western versus Eastern storytelling distinction, I think I'm like Avatar is like a great example of a westernized Eastern story because it is like fundamentally Eastern. I thought the word anime itself originates from France. No, see, if it's not from France, it's not anime, it's just anim, right? Because it's not from the original region. No, but getting back to before that horrible joke, getting back to Western versus like Eastern, it's I think deals a lot with like Eastern storytelling, and again being focused on the journey. So for those who didn't catch it last stream, I talked about the distinction between how like Western stories largely focus on the destination, right? So it's like the climax, it's your third act, it's what you're building up to. Whereas Eastern stories and Eastern storytelling in general have a lot of focus on the journey itself, right? So like all the pieces that lead up to the climax, which is why a lot of the times if you watch Eastern storytelling and Studio Ghibli movies and other stuff like that, the climax of the film doesn't feel as like potent. Some people even, you know, call it like a letdown sometimes. But that's because in Eastern storytelling, it is not about like the end of the story. It's about all the pieces that led up to the end, the journey that the character went on. And Avatar: The Last Airbender, I think, manages to make a very good like middle ground. There's a ton of like Western anime or Westernized anime that I think kind of act as introductions and like feeders into first-time anime watchers, right? That Avatar kind of like is similar to. So that would be, I think Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood specifically is a very westernized anime that does focus on the climax. I think Death Note is Death Note literally I think it's just like Batman and the Joker, but turned into, you know, like 20-year-old Japanese boys. But it's very westernized, and because of that, it's very palatable, right? These are the types of shows that are very widespread, and I think Avatar: The Last Airbender, it is very focused on like Aang has to defeat the Fire Lord. It is very Western, and it's like there is a climax that we have to achieve. We're shooting for that the entire time, but if you pay close attention, so much of the story is like deviations into little personal journeys that the characters are going on that don't necessarily always have like cumulative effects. Right, like it's not like every single episode is building on another. Now, again, as we go like further and further into the series, that does start to happen. Like every single one becomes more important to the one like after it. But there's still tons of episodes, even in the latter series, like or seasons. There's an episode about, you know, like, oh gosh, like the Lady of the Lake or the Lady of the River or something like that, and then Katara like fakes being her and whatnot, and it's I think lends itself well to the kind of episodic nature of animation, where it's like these little individual stories become like really cool for us to be able to see the growth of the characters and then exploring the world, and being able to see again that the Fire Nation are like people too, when the Earth Kingdom is, you know, as corrupt as they are, they're people too. So I think it's like a really westernized take on Eastern storytelling, because a lot of Western storytelling really is like convinced about being like episodic to the point of like standing on like cumulative. And I think a lot of Eastern storytelling inspiration is still used in there while still being like Western, in the way that it deals with its like climax, and its like progression. So that's how I would kind of like go about, in a brief way, my ideas on the anime debate, and then the Eastern versus Western stuff. Let's see. I'm going to read these comments to myself about Jordan, because again, and I know like half of this stuff comes from the fact that like I just have to read chat later because I get so involved in what I'm talking about that I'm coming back to read it. But I do read every single comment. I sometimes it just past the point of being able to actually make things cohesive. Tom I, the SFM guy, have you ever heard of or seen Emesis Blue? No, I've not. I've not heard of that. Is that a book series, or? I am not really sure. Man, what is your favorite part of storytelling? Mine is world building. My favorite part of storytelling, and this is going to seem very macabre, I really like dark storytelling. The people who read my books know it, and I love the ability to be able to just make people feel in general. And I think that while every single like kind of storytelling that you can do, whether it's happy or investigative or deconstructive, or philosophical, or whatever your story may be, I think that whatever makes people like feel, because each individual person is different, right? Everyone interacts with stories differently. Whatever makes them feel is the most important. And for me, what I found that I'm best at, I think, is telling stories of like real human tragedy. and I think digging deep into what causes people to tick, because I think a lot of what makes people feel is their response to hardships that they've had in the past, right? Because I think we all stand on the shoulders of our younger selves, hoping not to fall. And it's the things that have influenced us in the past, that have brought us to where we are today. And because of that, it's like so much of our identity is built up of the strength that we've cultivated in trying to move past like the vulnerability of where we were before. And I love writing characters who are dealing with like the continued struggle against their own vulnerability, because I think we resonate with that on like a personal level when we see that on the page. And I think that's like my favorite part, like seeing people become invested in the struggles, like the genuine human struggles of a person. And I think there definitely still is a space for like over the top non-humanized struggles, right? So like, you know, trying to save a planet, or, you know, like stop the destruction of a whole country, you know, like that definitely is cool. However, I think that my favorite thing is writing stories and conflicts that still ultimately deal with like the very personal like trauma that so many people deal with, right? So like an entire book that I wrote, Seeds of Shadows, is like dealing with a young boy's like trauma over being abused by his father and having like low self-esteem, but like wanting to be great, and needing to like earn the approval of his caretaker and whatnot. And of course, the entire time he's being like mentored by this like over-the-top 90-year-old hyper genius Irish mob queen. So it's not like it's all like mundane, but it's still, I think, ultimately at the end of the day, it's like focused on things that anybody can get invested in and possibly anyone could like understand. So I know that's obviously very different than like world building specifically, even though like world building may be like a close second, but I think that like that's what like inspires me, because I think having people connect to that, to like the deepest part of what makes a person tick, and seeing that on the page, I think that's really cool. Okay. Now I just want to ask more basketball. I'll be very quick on this one, Middleman. What are your opinions on Giannis and Jokic? I think they're the future of the NBA. I think the NBA is going to be very skewed towards big men who are skilled in all 5 positions. Now, if you look back across the history of the NBA, it has gone in like waves. At one point, it was a big men's league, so like centers, power forwards, all that kind of stuff. So Shaquille O'Neal, David Robinson, you know, Kareem, that kind of stuff. Then it was like a guards league, right? So like Kobe, AI, you know, Dwayne Wade. And then you had kind of like the introduction of like, well, really Dirk Nowitzki was like the prototype for Kevin Durant, because you had Dirk Nowitzki being like the 7-footer who would shoot outside, and then Kevin Durant came, and then Giannis came. And there's always been this big battle in the league between skill in size, because typically it was understood that like, so like Hashim Thabit was like a 7'3" player on the Thunder, who basically was brought into the league because he was tall. No shame on Hashim Thabit, but you know, and he didn't have much skill. But the shorter you are, generally, the more skill you need to play on the basketball court. But now we're getting to the point where the expectation is for you to be tall and skilled. And I think that Jokic and Giannis and KD, and Anthony Davis and so many other players who are above 6'8", 6'9", so like even Paul George, I think it's like 6'9" right now. LeBron 6'8". I think we're very much moving towards a future where the expectation is going to be size and skill, because it's not enough anymore. People are so good, and kids are becoming so good at such a young age that like that's, you know, I think the natural progression. Now, not everyone's going to be that good, right? Like there's still going to be people who, you know, like Taco Fall was I think like 7'5" and could generally dribble and, you know, like shoot a little bit, but you know, just wasn't coordinated enough. And I think, you know, there's some give and take either way between skill and size, but I think they represent the prototype for like the future of the NBA. Now, if you're asking between like who I think is better, I personally can't stand watching Giannis play, because I think Giannis is closer to the size version, or the size spectrum, than like the skill side, where Jokic is, I think, is all skill. They're almost like they exist in the same paradigm, but they're almost like dichotomous, right? Like opposite ends. And the reason I don't like watching Giannis play, and this will be the last thing I say on it, is because he is so physically dominant. He's like a gazelle version of Shaq, that I think it honestly allows him to not have to be skilled. I think that he doesn't need to become a good shooter, doesn't need to become a good free throw shooter, doesn't need to become a really great dribbler, because at the end of the day, if he can get 2 steps behind the 3-point line, he'll just dunk it on your face and you have to hold it, right? And I don't like watching that. It's amazing. It's really, really, I think, cool that he can do that. I just don't like watching it. But Jokic is like, you know, a creative player on like 2K. So those are my opinions. Var the Venerator, been watching your videos for a long while, and I'm currently working on a sci-fi novel. Thanks for the good vibes and good content. Well, you're welcome. I'm happy that you're able to, you know, come in here and get something of use. That's always what I want. If you want to reach out to me to be your editor, there's a link in my about page. I'm always looking for new clients. So yeah, Tubi, what's the best horror movie and why? Or Toby, you gotta let me know. Well, okay, here's my thing. I am, as much as I love horror, I am not going to sit here and say that I'm like a expert on like the vast kind of like cinematography or whatever it's called, the history of horror, because I mainly watch horror from like 2000 and on, right? And horror was established way before that as like a serious genre. I want to say like The Omen won like Oscars or something like that. Like, you know, horror used to be considered very kind of like niche genre. So I can't really say like the best horror. I can tell you my favorite horror movies for me personally. And I'm very skewed because I do not like jump scares, not because I'm scared by jump scares, but because I think jump scares are cheap. I think that and this is kind of like a psychology opinion, I think that jump scares prey on like the lizard brain kind of section of your mind, which has nothing to do with storytelling, but it has to do with like you literally reacting to stimuli. So like, you know, it's not the story making me scared or like me invested in the narrative or the characters. It's just like, oh yeah, there's a loud noise. And I like jumped because I don't like loud noises, but like a pan could fall in my kitchen and that's a loud noise, but that doesn't mean it's good writing. So I typically am not steered towards horror movies that rely on jump scares. I really love like atmospheric horror. So like my favorite horror movie of all time is still Hereditary by Ari Aster. Love that movie. A close second is The Conjuring 2. I think it's a phenomenal movie. I love character-driven horror. That it's like a real commentary on like people and the circumstances they're in, right? A lot of people don't think those horror movies are as scary as like the jump scare ones, which is perfectly fine. But that's like kind of like my cup of tea is these little kind of movies. Let Me In, both the original and the remake, are really good. Oh, there's another one. And Insidious, I think that's a James Wan movie. Also really good. I think the rest of the Insidious movies are okay, but Insidious 1 definitely is a classic. Excuse me. Oh, The Babadook, I think is really good. Some people may not be like super in love with the ending, but I think generally Babadook's really good. Lord, I mean, there's just so many. There's just, if you're wanting like a horror short story that's still animated, like and so visual, oh gosh, it's Love, Death and Robots had an episode directed by David Fincher, that I think it's called like Bad Travelings, I think is really, really good. So yeah, like that's generally, kind of like, and if you watch those movies or have seen those movies, you kind of get the vibe of like what I vibe with. And why I kind of like, Midsommar, really, really good. So yeah, so that's kind of like my list, but I cannot give you the best horror movie. That's kind of like a human opinion thing that I'm nowhere near qualified to make. Let me see. What's your personal favorite writing advice? Like whatever helped you with your writing the most? I talked about this a little bit on my last stream. But I mean, and then there's a ton. But I think there's a new one that I haven't talked about before was that someone said to me, or at least I think I read, good writing covers a multitude of sins. And I think as simple as that sounds, it's just this idea that you as a writer are definitely going to make mistakes, and you're always going to want to put forth that perfect manuscript. And you're going to think that like those mistakes that you've written are going to preclude you from being traditionally published or enjoyed by people just in general. And the idea behind good writing covers a multitude of sins is that no, it's that you think these things are going to like X you out, but people are, if they're invested in your writing, these like shortcomings that you think you have, people are just going to accept them and continue on, right? And obviously what is good writing is completely subjected to from one person to the other. People think that any old slop online can be good writing sometimes, where other people think that some of the best writing ever is really bad. I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan. I don't like JK's prose, and they're not for me, but you know, I think good writing covers a multitude of sins is really good to keep in mind, because I think it keeps you grounded, because as long as you feel like, as long as I improve, it doesn't matter how, well, it's not that it doesn't matter, but I can overcome the things that are still holding me back as long as I can improve. The next one is George R. Martin's advice on writing, and the only conflict worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself, right? So ultimately that's going to inform you about, hey, what's my conflict? Like, am I really making a commentary on like my characters? Are they the center of my story? Are they battling with things that real people battle with, even if not like in a literal sense? I think that's a really cool thing to always keep in mind. Like, what are your characters doing? Because I think that can help you out a lot in figuring out, you know, like where your story is, where it's going, how people can get invested in it. So yeah, I think those two specifically, and maybe I'll get into, you know, into more of them later, but you know, that and keep writing. You have to keep writing no matter how much it sucks, as long as you have a passion for it, as long as you feel that you want to keep doing it, no matter what anybody else says, keep going, keep writing. That's, you know, those three are probably my top. Let me see. What's the topic you have a script open for, but just have never... Derek Rawlings, what's the topic you have a script open for, but it's just never come together for you? If you're talking to me and not somebody else, I don't write scripts. I initially wanted to be a script writer. My dad bought me a book that pretty much disillusioned me of that at like age 12. And I never wanted to write scripts again, and I've only written novels. So, but if you are talking to me and you were just meant as like a story in general, I don't necessarily, any story that I think of, I automatically think I can write. There's never been something that's like eluded me. I think I just like have that kind of maybe reckless confidence to be like, oh yeah, I'll write this one day. Maybe not now, maybe not for like the next 5 years, but I'll write it someday. So, let me see. Settlers of Catan anime. Man, oh man, I wish Toph had something to do in season 3. Yeah, you know. Yes, it was the painted lady. It was the painted lady. That's what it was, not the river lady. Kate Hardley, I like the OG Full Metal better. You are in the minority. I am not saying that is bad at all. But it's funny that you even say OG, because like that, if you're talking about the anime, that was, I don't want to say made up, but that wasn't even the canon story, because the mangaka had not written out all of Full Metal Alchemist as a manga, and they were moving faster through the animation process than the manga was going, and so they had to basically kind of like make up something with her approval. And it was much darker, and it was still very good. But most people consider Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood to be the best anime of all time, like hands down. Like One Piece is definitely more popular and more long-standing, and I think now has like a wider viewership. But Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood like is it's hard to beat. Like it's 60 episodes of near perfection. There's like some small things wrong with it, but ooh-wee. It's really good. Oh, I will definitely. So Dom Calvo, do you know if you will ever cover the new Avatar show? I definitely will. I will talk about it on stream probably, and through videos. Doom Noir, hello to you too. Max Dude, is there a term for the emotional response a story triggers in the audience? I'm sure there is. There's terms for everything in writing. I'm positive there's some type of term, and obviously I'm probably the one to know it, because I am the kind of like the YouTube dictionary word guy when it comes to storytelling, but I just can't off the top of my head. But I'm sure there is. I like the darker stories too. I'm not against lighthearted, but most movies choose to use that as an excuse to be silly and comedic, and often ruins the experience for me. Yep, that's just what happens. I mean, people are just bad at writing generally. I mean, like, I was terrible at writing. This is not like a knock on anybody, but like people, just because people are in Hollywood doesn't make them good at writing. And I'm going to say a lot of what happens in Hollywood is because there's just too many cooks in the kitchen. If people don't like know how Hollywood works, like you, for the most part, it's not all the time, but you write a script and then you just sell it to a studio. And the studio from there gets to decide like what things to change. And so they'll have like a writer's room and how to adapt it. And, you know, like producers will have say so, and then they'll have notes and whatnot. And so you'll just have like multiple people, sometimes like dozens of people having input into a story, which is how you get stories that like feel incohesive or like aren't hitting their mark. It's because people who, one, maybe aren't trained in writing, or two, don't have a real unity with their artistic expression, are making pieces of this story. And because of that, you know, sillier stories or lighthearted stories can sometimes get these pieces that like undercut any kind of like real genuine emotional response that they can evoke from a consumer. And it's crappy that it is much harder to be genuinely lighthearted in fiction when you're targeting adults than it is to be like somber and serious. A group of people can write somber, serious stories because most of us, again, are dealing with the leftovers of our own trauma and vulnerabilities, which allows us to put it on the story like much easier. Whereas it's kind of hard to write happiness because everyone's like, I think happiness is informed by their own trauma to a certain degree. It's not all of it. It's not like happiness only comes from bad things, but you know, I do agree that sometimes lighthearted stuff gets like annoying. Sometimes because there's not even like a real purpose behind it. It's just kind of like a cute money grab, like porgs and whatnot. But that's a whole nother rant. Emesis Blue is a popular Team Fortress 2 fan, and it's a feature-length psychological horror thriller. That sounds right up my alley. I had friends who did a bunch of like Team Fortress 2 stuff. I've never been into that game, but I've heard a lot of like really interesting, cool stuff about it. So if it's all fan-made, that's, again, I love that kind of stuff. Golden Age, in your opinion, what are some of the greatest romances in fiction? Again, hard for me because I have so many. I think my #1 romance of all time is her with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson. I love tragic romances. Like there cannot be like anything but not anything but like largely I'm a tragic romance kind of dude. I love them. So her is really, really good. Hitch is like, I haven't seen it in a long time. I just remember really liking it. My dad really liked it. The Holiday, again, I haven't seen that in years, but I really liked it. These may be like nostalgia glasses on me. But yeah, those two movies. What else? The first romance that I realized that I ever really liked was actually Batman and Black Cat from, I think I'm sorry, Spider-Man and Black Cat from the animated show back in like the early 2000s. That was like the first time I ever like shipped characters, because I'm just like, oh my gosh, Felicia Hardy, she's so hot. Oh my gosh, Peter is so awkward and weird with her. Maybe they can get together. And I was like, have you ever thought about this? Like any other character? No, I hadn't. But then again, like Felicia Hardy's Black Cat was just ridiculous. She's kind of like Eris, like literally made to be attractive. So, but yeah, so like I guess that, if you want to count that as a romance. Trying to think, because I don't like search out romances, but I just love romance stories. So I'm not necessarily even, I guess, like the best person to, even though I name like 4 off the top of my head. Technically it's not a romance, but Arrival has a really, really good message on love that I think is really, really cool. And if you haven't seen Arrival, I'd highly recommend it. So yeah, those are like my thoughts on that. Oh, video scripts. Okay, I also need to like scroll down, just make sure that people because they're typing to me and I can't see it because I'm not scrolling. Video scripts. Okay, for videos. That's a really good question. I at some point will do a throwback breakdown for both Treasure Planet and Eldorado. Those are scripts that I really want to do. Scripts that got away from me. I have a list of like, because I've made over, I think like 100 some odd videos. I think basically each on like new topics. So I don't typically like have stuff elude me as far as like things that like I don't do that I set out to do. I'd have to think. I guess it would just be like maybe like video game stuff. Like I'd love to do like a Mass Effect video. It's just that so a lot of the stuff that I'd like to talk about is just so old that as of right now I don't know if I get the right clicks, which is a terrible thing to say, but you know, this is my job and I had to make money. I'd love to do more video game content. I just have to figure out a way to do it that it's, you know, interesting. And then more anime content, but generally my anime content doesn't do like super well. It's like touch and go. But yeah, I did think about that. It's a really good question. Let me see. Go blue. Yes, thank you. The Fish Jozo Corner, Savage Books. My favorite anime is called Monster, and it's very westernized. I will have to look into it. I need to read or watch the rest of Jujutsu Kaisen. I'm reading or watching Undead, Unluck. I need to finish Spy Family. And like, you know, there's just so much. What's that? Even if you've never heard or interact with the Team Fortress 2, you'll like it. Okay, you know. Sounds good to me. Mason G, is there a specific way one may lay out and or create a trail of evidence in order for a detective to follow? That's a great question. I've not yet done, I think, a video on detective stories, which honestly I probably should. But I think, I mean, it's to me, I guess, conceptually, because I haven't necessarily written directly a detective story, but I've written a crime story about a kidnapping. So off the top of my head, you would need to understand, this is like definitely a reverse engineer type stuff, right? Because, oh gosh, if I can remember it, like deductive versus inductive reasoning is different. And to deduce something which is like detective work largely, is to take a lot of information and distill it down into something singular. And inductive reasoning is to take a very small amount of information and make it bigger, extrapolated, right? And a lot of the times detective deduce things, right? So Sherlock Holmes was deductive. But if you want to bring your reader on a deductive journey, right, you need to understand like where the end of the journey is. And that's different for, you know, every single story. I can't give you specifics on that. But once you figure out like where the end of your journey is, as far as kind of like the mystery that you want, you need to think of like logical steps based upon the end point that would make sense as clues for a person to follow. And again, I can't really like get specific about it because like I don't know the story. It's just so different from like story to story. But that's how I would think, like first understanding where you want to end, like reverse engineer things, and then figure out like what stuff was imperfect in the execution of whatever my character did, whatever, if it's the villain or whatever it is. I guess Death Note is like a great example. Like literally, I think it's like the first or the second episode. It seems from like a reader or like a consumer's perspective, like a watcher's perspective, that there would be no way to catch L or Light, or any way to even figure out like where he is. But when you actually hear L break down how he found him, he's like, oh yeah, you've only been killing people in Japan, and not only have you been, you know, killing people in Japan, you've been killing people in like this prefecture, and this thing that you did here didn't match these other things. And these killings were close enough together that I'm guessing like you just started out killing this way, right? It's that kind of stuff. It's like pattern recognition, and it's the little things, the flaws in the execution of whatever, you know, it is being deduced, is being like, you know, investigated, that you have to drip feed to both your characters and the reader or the audience. Because if you don't know where it's going, and I'm talking about like specifically, like you have to think out everything, because if you don't know those things, then you can't expect to create a story based around the deduction of those things. So hopefully that helps. Okay, I'm gonna skip to the bottom real quick. Man, I've not read Tokyo Ghoul, but I know I need to. Let's go, Chiefs. Thoughts on the Knives Out movie? Let me see. Movies as detective mysteries. Okay, so here's the thing. I barely even think of the Knives Out movies as detective mysteries. I don't know. Like, they definitely are. Don't get me wrong. They are 100% movies based in like deduction of a literal mystery. But I think the Knives Out movies are like so much more. They're like purposeful subversions of like just so many established storytelling tropes and like characters, and honestly kind of like the deduction is like secondary. They're using the, I think, typical format of a kind of like detective goes into some place and then is looking for all the clues and whatnot to get to the bottom of something, but it's way more about like how can we turn everything on its head, right? Because I think both of those movies, both Glass Onion and Knives Out, their entire purpose was to just like trick the reader, or I'm sorry, the consumer, the watcher, into like not even understanding what the tropes were anymore. But I think they're both good. I think that I really like Knives Out and I like Glass Onion, but they are so much more than just kind of like your typical detective narratives, and like purposely so, I think. Golden Age, do you feel biopics are necessary? I don't think, I'm gonna be real, I don't think any story is necessary. I think that literally all art is whatever you make of it. I think biopics can be cool depending on who it is, but yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go back up. There's so many comments here that I have, like, let's see. I do have more stuff to do today, so I probably will not be able to get to all these. Can I make this bigger? I'm gonna mess with oh my gosh, I can. That is so helpful. I had my screen so tiny so I couldn't see like the chat, but now it's bigger. Oh, I'm Metaman. I'm currently working on a series that's heavily influenced by BoJack Horseman in terms of writing characters. Well, you better get some therapy, because those characters are a lot to handle. Yeah, I'll be praying for you. Blue's Clues is the best westernized anime, Tubby. There's just no competition. Let me see. Broken Entertainment, I'd like to add to that, don't assume you have to write for hours a day. Find 30 minutes somewhere, they add up. A lot of people intimidated by thinking that they need to have big blocks of time. Yeah, I think that there's a thing in writing where people like, well, and this is like my exact thoughts about NaNoWriMo too, if you guys saw that video, people will put these expectations on themselves or what needs to be done, or like what is good writing, or like, you know, their pattern or their routine that they need to adopt, you know, and then they'll psych themselves out. I'm a person that actually I need 2 hours to write minimum, or else I'm not gonna write. But I think that I'm, you know, am only that way because I found the best way for me to write. It's because I have been doing this since, you know, like doing this. I've been writing novels since I was 16. I finished my first novel at 19. And then had, you know, again, 5 books by the time I was 22 or 23 or something like that. And it was a bunch of trial and error, and I was really bad. I had to figure out, like, where can I work? Can I have people around me? Do I need music? Do I not need music? Do I need silence? Like, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, just find your own rhythm. Find what you need to do. Sarah Unia, thank you for all you do and your amazing content. I discovered you on accident. I've been loving and learning ever since. Thank you for your inspiration. Thank you too. Thank you for coming in. Hi there, first stream I've ever been able to catch. Hope you're well. I am well. Kind of hungry though. Let's see. Derek Rawlings, heck yeah, Treasure Planet. I'm very partial to Disney's Atlantis. Such a solid script. Again, that is one of my favorite videos that I've ever made is the Atlantis script. That was something that I wanted to do from like day one. Really, really liked it. It like, that was the fact that I've like, there's some things that I absolutely hate about being on YouTube. But the fact that I essentially got to live out like my dream of my crushed dream of being a filmmaker that I had when I was younger, because again, I started out wanting to write scripts. I wanted to make TV shows and movies. And then again, was completely dissuaded by my dad, who was an electrical engineer. And he's like, I'm not paying all that money for you to be jobless when you get out of college, pick something else. I started writing poetry and books. But through YouTube, I got to basically like make my own videos and my own movies and stuff like that. And that was really cool. And that Atlantis one, I think was my first real foray into something that was very near and dear to my heart. And I did a ton of research on that. And I was very thankful that people really liked that video, because I think even now it has like hundreds of thousands of views. And that means a lot to me, right? And there's some stuff that you'll like never really experience, I think, again in life. I think that was really cool to be validated like that. Or like me thinking like other people are just as passionate about this kind of crap as I am, and they're gonna like it. So I'm happy that I could do that. And I definitely, again, want to do more. I'm sad that it's taken me this long to do another throwback breakdown. So I have also wanted to check out Trigun. Max, dude, I really do question why El Dorado and Atlantis got such critical polarizing. They seem so. It's because I think genuinely it was because they were more serious. I think animation at that time wasn't supposed to be serious. There was just so few serious animations. That people just didn't like care. They didn't want to, I think, even take in the idea that animation could be that way. And it was foreign to them. Now, of course, we know with animation being sometimes even more serious than real life, like live action, that's completely fine. But yeah, animation back then was considered a child's thing, and having so much mature content. I mean, there was like a blowjob in El Dorado, for Pete's sake, you know. They did not pull their punches. And even though Disney, I think, also had its like forays into very mature animation with Hunchback of Notre Dame, and then, you know, like some of the stuff happening in Tarzan, and it still wasn't anything like El Dorado and Treasure Planet and Atlantis. And I think people just weren't ready for it, but they're ready now, which is why they're so loved. And again, I don't know what I'll do if they ever do remake like a live action version of Atlantis. I don't care how bad. Oh, I will care how bad it is, but if they do, I'm going to see it. I have been fan casting that with my friends for literally probably like 6 years. So hopefully they make it. Same with Sinbad. Yes, Sinbad, another movie that I was like super happy to be able to make a throwback breakdown on, and people really loved it. I think that was like my second best performing throwback breakdown like ever. Max, no, they would no. Chell definitely gave one of those dudes a blowjob. In that movie, it was yeah. Metaman, what is a series you hate that a lot of people don't understand its themes? Oh, so like, what is a series that I am angry that people don't get it? I would have to think. Cause like generally I'm on the same side of like public consensus when it comes to fiction. I'm like, there's very few things that like, and generally the things that I like or the things that I dislike are things that people like, right? So there's a lot of stuff that like I dislike that other people like, but there's not a lot of stuff that I like that other people don't like. So I'd have to think about that one. What is the, did I answer this? What is the one advice you'd give to aspiring fiction writers? Yeah, again, keep writing. Keep writing. Don't let it stop. As long as you love it, keep doing it. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Asha Gore, do your editing services apply to just novels, or is it for all mediums of storytelling? So it is, I'm going to say the manuscript consultation is for anything that's like written down, right? So people have submitted comics to me. I've done scripts, plays, novels, poems, short stories. I've done pretty much almost everything you can think of. I'm going to say that if you have like specifically a manga or a comic though, it might be better to make like phone calls. So like the coaching phone calls are probably better to be able to like pin down aspects of whatever writing you're doing for manga and comics, because I think it's a lot easier for us to be able to talk about whatever dialogue and stuff is being given, because so much of those are just like visual, and a lot of people don't come to me with all the visuals for like comics and manga already done, right? They are in much more of like a conceptual state. But I do pretty much everything. I think manga and comics are like the only things where it gets kind of tricky, but generally it's fine. Brittany Johnson, what character do you relate to the most? Like, okay, so I'm gonna answer this two ways. So what character specifically do I relate to the most? I'm not sure. What character type do I relate to the most? I'm also not sure. I don't think about, I've been, I think either very blessed or maybe robbed to not be that invested in even becoming interested in my relation to characters. I don't relate to characters. I think maybe I relate to all characters. I don't know. That's just not, there's very few times in my life where I can actively remember being like, I relate to this character, but it was when I was much younger. So this is like a very pivotal thing for me. It's like finding out Tarzan was white was very angering for me. I might have talked about this before. I had always thought that Tarzan was a black guy, because I thought he was tan, he had dreadlocks, and when I was a young kid, I thought he was just light-skinned black dude like me. And I remember not even being like conscious of the comfort that I felt with that, but someone told me, it's like, no bro, he's very British, like his parents were both white. And I had seen Tarzan like a dozen times, and in my head it had never occurred to me that like, yeah, Alex, both of his parents are white, how would he possibly be black? And I think that's like one of the last moments where I can think of like, oh yeah, I really like related to this character because I just didn't see a lot of people like me on screen. But like as an adult, I don't know, like it's hard for me to even like think about like relating to a character. So I'd had to think about that. But yeah, I guess if it was, that's the answer maybe to your question, then it's like maybe relate to Tarzan. So yeah. Yeah, I've written scripts. I think it goes off total word count. Yes, everything's based off word count. It's not page count. Page count means nothing to me. It's all word count. How has your writing process changed over the years? A lot more introspection into the characters, I think. I think originally when I was writing, it was a lot more big ideas, a lot of like, I think large scale kind of like conflicts and whatnot. And now I'm just so much more interested in kind of like the nitty gritty of like my characters and thinking about what they would want and how they would feel and how they would react and being genuine to them. And I think that has helped me as a writer, like not get too far ahead of myself when I'm you know, creating these stories and these narratives, because so often I think you lose track. You miss the trees for the forest when you don't think about your characters and who they really are. So I think that is the number one thing that has changed with me, because I still write these ridiculous, crazy stories, but I think I am less inclined to forget why I'm writing them, and it's all about the characters. Do you watch professional wrestling? No, I do not, but I know some of it. Jeremy Ragoza, how do you analyze stories to figure out its theme or other subtle parts inside the story? So it's probably hard for me to even talk about this because it's so second nature to me now. But I will say, you generally can find out a story's theme or its message by what it seems it wants you to learn from it, right? So if the story and what it frames as good and bad, my family's from Michigan, my mom's from Lansing and my dad's from Detroit, but yeah, figuring out what the story is framing as good and bad, most of the time is going to tell you like what its theme is, right? So if a story is trying to show like, you know, rags to riches, right? And it's talking about how the character ends up happy, right? Which is usually good, because he worked really hard and he ended up getting what he wanted because of his hard work. Then the theme of that story can usually be, you know, and again, unless things are getting like real wonky, but for that kind of story, it's like, oh, the theme of the story is if you work hard, you will succeed and be rewarded for your hard work. And that's how you can break down pretty much any story that you interact with. You look at what is the story framing as a positive outcome, or what is it framing as a negative outcome, right? So like Breaking Bad, if you guys have seen that, was like a cautionary tale, where it's just like, yeah, this seemingly average dude was given power and money, in borderline fame within, you know, the meth community, and it wouldn't it didn't really corrupt him so much as revealed how corrupt he really was, but he was just an average guy, and it was just like, this is the kind of stuff that can happen to you. And it's because it was like so much about like, this is bad. It was like, hey, the theme of Breaking Bad is like, anybody can be corrupt, you know, like, don't get into these things, don't live this lifestyle, it's bad for you, don't delude yourself into thinking that doing bad things for the right reasons is good, because it's not. So looking at what a story is trying to tell you tells you its themes. Now, you don't have to agree with these themes. You don't have to like, you know, take in and internalize these themes and whatnot, but that's the way to try to figure them out, so you can go about the investigative process on your own of being like, okay, so now what do I think about them? So no, man, for me it's people misunderstanding Naruto's true theme. I am not going to talk about Naruto. Not that I have like extreme opinions on it, but I know that a lot of people do have extreme opinions on it. Adrian, sorry I'm late. We're shopping for pepperoni pizza and they were out of just cheese and pepperoni. Super Bowlers don't like mushrooms and peppers on pizza, apparently. You know, we are ravenous people. Oh, I want pizza now. Okay, so which of your characters do you relate to most then? I don't know. For those of you who have not read my books, I'm trying to think of the characters that are not crazy or psychos. I guess Rian, Brittany. I guess if I had to like choose, maybe Derek. I don't know. Read my books if you if you want to know what I'm talking about. They're on my website. I got 4 of them available. I'm going to have the 5th and the 6th one available pretty soon. So if you want to find out what I'm even answering here, go there. Mr. Skerfuffle Whiskers. Are you pro or con grammar rules? Do you think they are necessary for novel writing or advocate that they can be broken for prose stylistic artistic reasons? Who's your favorite author for prose and style? Good question. So again, this goes towards me being very interested in language and etymology. Language, ultimately, this is my guiding light for just language and kind of like all things having to do with language in general. Language is for communication. If I can communicate something to you and you understand it, then I have done my job. A lot of people get hung up on how did you communicate the thing that I understood, right? So for example, if I say, I ain't got time for that, and I'm around some like snooty old person that's like, what do you mean you ain't got time for that? Or even better, I ain't got no time for that. And they say like, that's a double negative, that's wrong. You can't say, all the while they understood what I said, right? And they're being so pedantic that they're now arguing about me not using language correctly after having language used so correctly that even while not adhering to the rules that they're used to, still got the point across about what they should take away from my message, right? And that should give you some information about like how I think about grammar in general. Language and grammar when writing is completely yours to play with. Everything that you do, everything that you do on the page is kind of like up to yours to have fun with. And the people who are going to be mad at you for like making up a word or changing stuff, to me, are the same people who are going to be like, oh, I love Shakespeare and stuff like that. And Shakespeare made up tons of words, like literally just made up words, like whole cloth, that we think are very normal and casual, but like he just made them up. So I think you can like do anything that you want, but you have to remember, not everyone's going to know what you're talking about. You will fail to communicate sometimes if you're being weird. There's some, so for example, there was one thing I was writing, I remember specifically back in college. And I was thinking about ways to try to like spice up my writing a bit, add some color to the prose. And one of the things that I had said when I was talking about a character, I didn't want it to say he sighed. So I said, or, you know, I was talking about their breathing. And so I said, he took in a deep breath and let out its twin, right? And so, you know, by let out its twin, it's like, oh yeah, he exhaled a equally deep breath. And I thought I was being clever. And some other people were just like, oh, that's a good line. Another person reading it was like, what do you mean let out its twin? And I'm like, what do you mean? And it's like, well, he took in a deep breath and like, what do you mean like let out its twin? I'm like, oh, well, he breathed out, he exhaled. And they're like, well, what do you mean by like its twin? Like an exhale is different from an inhale. It's not its twin. And I'm like, well, you were supposed to like think that it's still a breath. And like, oh, well, I didn't get that. And in that moment, I failed. I failed that person because my language wasn't enough to communicate what I wanted to them. And I ran that risk, right? And I'm comfortable running that risk multiple times over with many other people who are going to read my writing, because ultimately at the end of the day, I like the way that I write, and I want there to be like a balance struck between people who are going to also like how I write and people who don't get how I write. And it's becoming like a good writer is understanding that by definition, there are going to be people who don't like what you write and don't like how you write, but you have to keep writing that way because no one's ever going to be complete. No group of people is ever going to be completely satisfied with what you're doing on the page. So I think grammar and purple prose and artistic realism and all that, that's completely up to you, but understand your own skill and the alienation that you might be doing and how to come to terms with it. And, you know, how to be able to say, I'm okay maybe with this line not being interpreted. But if someone does get it, it's going to increase the story for them so much more. And that's up to you, right? And the more you get feedback on what you can or cannot do, I think the more you're going to be able to realize what you can or cannot get away with. Who's your favorite author for prose and style? That's hard. Oh gosh, honestly, and this is gonna sound weird, I'm not gonna name any names, but like I have enjoyed the work of some of my clients more than like professional like authors, like well-known professional authors. There have been some gorgeous books that I've read, and I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Connor McGinn, Lover Vids, just wanted to ask if you ever watched Blue Eye Samurai on Netflix. I have not, but I really want to. And if you ever make a video on it, definitely had an arcane vibe to it. Keep up the good work. I really do need to watch that. I've just, again, reheard about it recently. So that'll probably be something I'm up to next. Also, I'm going to be on here for like 6 more minutes because it's almost 9 o'clock and I still have other things to do today. So you'll be able to, I'm almost to like the end anyway. The Big Chef, any recommendation for dark high fantasy that actually has good prose? Big fan of Cormac McCarthy and Neil Gorman for reference. Dark high fantasy. I mean, me? Okay, so for people who don't know, I wrote a book called Seeds of Shadows, which is it's about it is about a 90-year-old Irish woman, or my version of Irish for, you know, my fantasy world, who is secretly, so she is the great grandmother of a guy who rules over like a whole country, who, you know, or which in and of itself is a part of an empire. So the guy that rules over the country is still like underneath an emperor, but he rules that region of the empire, which is basically Ireland. And his great grandmother is, unbeknownst to him, more or less like the leader of like a huge criminal syndicate, and she's like a genius. And she has been hoping to find a successor to take up the reins of basically kind of like a person to pass on the torch to, because she believes that the world basically has to be guided in a certain way, that people are stupid and dumb and can't be trusted to live their own lives, and so there needs to be people behind the scenes to move everything along. And she had hoped it would be one of her family, and she's been waiting her entire life for someone to be born in her family to be able to take up her position, and nobody ever has. And she's very bitter about it. And what happens one day is that a character comes in, his name is Donovan, he's a little 12-year-old boy, and she realizes that this 12-year-old boy, who her great grandson is supposed to mentor, Donovan is the child of another lord. She's like, oh my gosh, Donovan is a genius, and I can mold him and take this innocent, kind little boy and turn him into basically a criminal mastermind. And that's what Seeds of Shadows is about. It's Anthuria is her name. Is almost like psychologically kidnapping Donovan and turning him across 12 years. So the book takes place across 12 years. And it's really dark. She is almost like taking away his humanity slowly across these 12 years, for him to become the most dangerous man in the world. And it's actually a prequel to another book that I wrote. All my books take place in the same universe. And Donovan is a recurring character in my core series, which is called Blood of One's Blood. And Seeds of Shadows is about how Donovan becomes basically the most dangerous man in the world. And how you see the innocence being taken away from like this little boy, to be turned into this like cold, ruthless man. And I would highly recommend, most people say that that's my best work. It's my best book. It's 300 pages, right around 96,000 words. So if you're looking for really, really good high fantasy with good prose, I'd recommend going to my website and buying that. So I think that's the perfect place for me to end. That little self-plug right there. Thank you all for watching, sticking with me for the last hour and a half. I'll be back on Tuesday. and enjoy the rest of your night. I have no idea what's been happening with the Super Bowl, by the way, so I'll have to check that out. So I'll see y'all later.